My name is Carl Quill, and this is Founder Quest, a podcast about the journeys of starting a game studio. Today, we're talking with Cole Clifford of Pickford AI. It's a bit of a different company than we've talked about before, leaning a little less games and a little more entertainment. That said, the journey of a founder in that broader space is still pretty relevant, and hearing about the path Cole took from being at the front lines as an early employee on a successful exit to stepping up to co-founder for this journey gave me a lot to learn from. Let's jump in. I think everyone sort of has a really interesting story around that moment where you went from, oh, maybe I could do a lot of things, or maybe I could start a company, to, no, I'm starting a company. I've mentally and emotionally committed to that journey. And I'm curious what yours is.
Yeah. I think mine starts pretty far back, actually. And this will probably be one of the longer spiels I'll give. But in 2017, my co-founder had started another company in Toronto. Actually, it was called Deep Learning, deeplearni.ng. They bought a Nigerian domain name and kind of latched onto that. And the name changed over time into Dessa. We started doing these kind of side projects, one of which a group of the team kind of said, we could try and get on the Joe Rogan podcast. We're gonna mimic his voice. We're gonna create a deep fake of him. At the time he wasn't as controversial. He was still a little controversial, but not as much as he is now. They spent the next few months creating, what's effectively one of the first deepfakes, production deepfakes that existed. We've since found out that it's actually like on the CIA timeline of deepfakes, is like this Joe Rogan little side project that we did. And that kind of blew up in a whole bunch of different ways. One of the ways was us getting acquired. One of the other ways was a lot of people from Hollywood reaching out. There's a lot of people saying, well, we could use this to tell stories in different ways and unique ways. Graceland, Elvis Presley's, his big thing, reached out and were like, can we deepfake his voice and have new unique lines of dialogue within the museum? And so that kind of kicked off this whole conversation between Steve, my co-founder, and I of, what is Hollywood and storytelling going to look like in the near future? We had about 4 years of golden handcuffs after the acquisition. So unfortunately we were 4 years tied before we started doing this. But I think that 4 years was a really good incubation period where we discussed quite extensively all these different paths and ways that storytelling would change and could be more dynamic, blur the line between creation and experience as well. And so once those handcuffs kind of fell off, I think it was a natural moment for us to say, okay, let's jump in and do it. We've been talking about it for long enough.
So were you, just for clarity, were you founder of the previous company as well?
I was the first engineer. So missed the founding journey just by a sliver. But I've been lucky enough for him to think of me this time around.
Yeah, for sure. But I think, that is, you get sort of the front row seat. It's never truly the same as being a founder, but gives you enough of the visibility of like, okay, maybe you have a slightly better idea of what you're getting yourself into this time around.
I think it was all the fun without the risk. Was really what ended up happening. Probably disillusioned me a bit. I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, I could do it. I could do it.
Oh yeah,
But
so easy. Like this
yeah,
this seems trivial.
yeah,
Uh cool. So then, on this time around, you've discussed this thing, you have a sense of what a founding journey kind of looks like from the front row seat, but haven't lived it. Uh you decide you're gonna do this thing, the golden handcuffs come off. What what started to become the learning journey for you at that point of like, okay, I've decided to do this thing, we're doing this thing, I have a second time founder with me, but now I need to learn how to do all these things.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a ton of things that stick out as kind of funny to me. The first time around, I was so involved with the technology and the tools that we were building and all that stuff. So I got really used to, there's never enough time to make what you need, and you kind of just have to like make it work in the time that's given. I got very good at hacking things together and making sure they're there. I think that a lot of the learning for me is really around like the management side of it. For everything from how do you set up insurance and payroll to this is one of my first times really leading a team and being in that role, which still feels very strange and foreign to me. So I think that mentality of how do you keep people motivated and excited about the project. The growth is entirely different when you're looking at it from a founder perspective. That the first time around, it was just like, yeah, I got new teammates and it's going to be fun and a blast and you're cool and I like you. And this time it's really like, okay, the strategic mentality behind the growth. I still love all the people that I'm working with. I think we've built a really solid team so far. But yeah, the strategy behind it is something unique. So there's a million things, but I think it's really all around the management side that's been the big learning.
Out of curiosity, and this is a question I always enjoy asking people who are relatively new to that sort of leadership and management side, especially when they have deep experience being the like doer and sort of like engineer on the ground or individual contributor on the ground, especially at like pretty senior levels. Was there ever a moment where you were like, oh, this is why that thing happened, or this is why that decision I thought was stupid keeps happening? It's this weird management leadership thing.
Yes, there's definitely a bunch of those. Yeah, there's a bunch of unique learnings, and I think taking the time to really do a retrospective on things has been important. Yeah, I think there's a lot of decisions around choices of technology that start to make a lot more sense to me. From the technical side, I was like, why would we use this? It doesn't make any sense. It really will kneecap us and put us in a rough position. But you can't, as a strategic management position, you can't just say, well, obviously we're going to use this. There's a ton more that you kind of have to go down that list of pros and cons, like time to implementation, longevity of the tool itself, right? Is it a startup that's providing the tool, and can you trust that they'll be around in a year? How much can you really mold it and maintain it? The cost of maintenance versus just paying someone else to do it. There's all these decisions that now make a lot more sense to me.
Yeah. I also always find the one within that particular realm is the okay, but if we make that decision, what is our talent pool versus another path, right? Like in for us, when you think about, okay, do you go Unreal or Unity or a smaller engine, or do you write your own? All of those are like drastically different talent pools that you then are like, okay, well, how good's my networking in each of those, and which one should I choose based on that, right?
Yeah. I mean, we use Unity for a bunch of stuff that we're doing, and we had that same discussion of, okay, well, Unreal looks good. I really like Godot because it's open source. I've never used any of these three, so I really have to look at like, okay, if we we put out a job description and who starts kind of applying. And we did a little bit of A/B testing. Like we put out the same job description with Unity sub to Unreal, and we got a ton more Unity responses. So we ended up just going with Unity. But again, all that technical thing is pulling at me like, Unreal looks amazing and Godot is open source and you can modify it. The community seems great. So, a decision that I, would have come to a very different conclusion on, a year ago versus 6 years ago.
Yep, absolutely. So a lot of the folks who listen to the podcast are folks who are either very early on their founding journey or are thinking about a founding journey. Like, okay, should I do this? From sort of that journey of in sort of a vacuum, you're like, okay, I'm going to start a company. I'm going to be a founder this time. Like me and Steven are going to go on this journey together. To now where you've gone on this big learning journey, what is the like biggest or couple biggest points that you'd be like, okay, if you're thinking about going on a founding journey, really think about these things?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the conclusions that I've come to is there's never going to be a perfect time to make that decision. I'm a very analytical person. I spend a lot of time trying to weigh the pros and cons and come to the most informed decision that I can. And I think when you're trying to make this decision, there is a set of risks that can exist, and there's a subset of those that will affect you right now in this given moment, and that subset will change day by day, week by week, month by month. So, really trying to approach it from an analytical perspective is almost impossible. And if all the stars line up, you consider yourself a very, very lucky individual. So I think that's one of the biggest takeaways for me is, you can't do it in the traditional, pro con, direction. It really does become, like there's some minor points that you have to make sure, can you eat? Will your family have a house over their head? There's those like fundamentals that you need to get down. But as long as you can figure those out, it really becomes a trust of your gut. Is this the time? Is this the people that I want to do it with? Again, those risks are going to hit you, but you kind of have to trust your gut with it.
So switching topics a bit, let's talk about co-founders. And we've already talked a bit, you've already shared the story really of how you found and met your co-founder. And it's in some ways more of the classic tale of you guys worked really strongly together, almost as co-founders prior, and so you're sort of doing your second thing together, which is a strong story for investors, of course. But I'm curious, like when you think about your co-founder makeup, how do you think about what you bring to the table, what Steven brings to the table, how that balances and complements each other, right? Like, how did you, like, what about that besides just, 4 years of nerding out about this idea made you think, no, this is the right choice for us as co-founders. Why not go get a third, right? Like those kind of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will say we did explore an option for a third. Another individual who went through the previous startup with us. He actually lives close by me in the forest, in the woods. He has taken some time away from all of the insanity
from civilization.
What this brings. Yeah, exactly. So we did explore the third, and I think having worked very closely with Steven in the past, he is absolutely exceptional at telling stories and getting people motivated behind that story. So he just goes out and like he'll disappear for a week and he comes back and he's like, I've talked to all these people. They want to, put money into it. They want to put time into it. Someone will think that you could do this and that. And and he just kind of rallies people in such an incredible way. And I think that outward facing, view of a company is if you can get that right, there's a lot of stuff that can happen internally. It gives the internal view of a company a bit more breathing room to make mistakes and try things out, experiment with, things that no one else has ever experimented with before. The traditional startup path is fairly well plotted out at this point. There's a ton of luck attached to each of those stages, but, getting a proof of concept, trying to find product market fit, all of those pieces, if you have someone who can stand up and tell this like exceptional story, those pieces can take a little bit longer than they traditionally do, or have a bit more deviation than they might in other options. So that really became, in my mind, a lot of how we started viewing the makeup, kind of, without even explicitly saying it to each other. So that leaves kind of, okay, the internal, how the technology is moving, what's the overarching path for the technology, how the team is going to be structured. Those types of things really started falling under my purview. And especially in the company that we're in, the technology needs to be, moving pretty quick. So I find I can just double down on that as long as I hire the right team, that I don't have to be, managing conflict and all that annoying stuff. We can just kind of build. So
those annoying interpersonal dynamics.
Yeah. Luckily, none of that yet.
Out of curiosity, how big is Pickford at this point?
We have about 15 people. Yeah.
So you're on the cusp of like having sort of like two team structures and like thinking through that kind of stuff, but you're not quite there yet. You can still get away with what's it called, the two pizza rule.
Yeah. Or I know as we've started thinking about this next stage, there's that's coming into my mind a lot.
Yeah. So you and Steven talked about this sort of journey for a while, and you talked to a third co-founder potential and sort of explored that. When it started to become real, like not just like, hey, we could do this, but no, and not even just like, hey, we're on the path to doing this, but like, no, we're going to commit to this. We're going to sort of formalize it. What were the most important conversations for you guys to have explicitly to make sure that like, hey, here's how we're going to operate as co-founders. Here's how we get through conversations and make decisions and deal with disagreements, right? Like how did that crystallize from that sort of implicit like set of conversations into, no, we're explicitly going on this journey together?
Yeah, I feel like it happened fairly naturally. I think so. When I had started at the previous company, Dessa, I was like fresh out of school, and so I basically just hounded Steven like all the time. Teach me this, teach me that. Let me give this talk. Let me get in front of these investors. Like, just let me learn. And so I feel like we kind of grew into this natural rapport of how those things, how we work really well together. Disagreements is an interesting dynamic always, especially when you start to care deeply about someone else. There's always that annoying cliche of like, oh, we're not a company, we're a family. And I think as cliche as that is, I think when you're doing a co-founding journey with people, you kind of have to morph into that. It's almost like some weird perverted form of dating, is really what it is. And so when you care deeply about someone, you worry more about the disagreements. You worry not only how it's going to affect the company and the livelihood of the people that work with you, but also that relationship and the connection that you have. And I think Steve and I have had developed a very good system of just debate and discussion. With no malice involved. It's really just, okay, well, let's get all the different thoughts and all the different options in front of us. Let's take some time to sleep on it and think about it. Um, Pursuing outside advice as well, whenever needed. That always helps diffuse situations. I find if you can have, a third party boogeyman who can, make the decision for you, it makes things feel a little bit better. So I think we've developed that kind of process of discussion, debate, step away and then come back with a bit of decision. I mean, we've been lucky. I feel like most of the time, probably like 95, 98% of the time, we've been on a very similar page. So yeah, I don't find we've butted heads too much.
I talking about it like perverted sort of dating. I often refer to it as co-founder dating because you're going to get business married. And so I think there, to your point, there's a level of like that co-founder relationship is far deeper than a co-worker sort of relationship. Um, and there's probably all sorts of pros and cons to thinking about it as like co-founder dating into business married, but I think it does give a good sense of like this is the level of reflection and conversation and commitment that you're kind of signing up for, right? Because like if the business goes well, you could be working alongside this person for 10 years, right? And like in the trenches with them for 10 years. So
yeah, when we talk about it, we usually at some point in the conversation we'll say, it matters more that we're on the same page rather than, the exact direction that you make. I find that the hardest part that I've seen in the past is when decisions are made that create some animosity when the decision fails. And then it becomes it failed and it was your decision. So that was your fault that it failed. And like that divide, I think is kind of it's a long burn. It doesn't happen immediately. And so whenever we've been making decisions, Steve and I together, it's usually like, as long as we agree that we're going in this direction, then, that animosity shouldn't form in the future, ideally. And so it causes a bit more intense discussion up front. But I think that's been working so well or so far. So
yeah, I often think about it like that concept as far as like keeping score. The minute any two people, like whether it's friends or a relationship or co-founders, start keeping score, then that's a really big flag that things are going downhill and needs to be resolved. Because to your point, then it becomes like, well, that one was on you and this one, oh sure, that one's on me, but you did this, right? And it immediately becomes that antagonistic thing versus even if you're wrong together, if you're right together, and you just stay in lockstep, that works out better for the long-term health of the relationship, right? Cool. So let's talk a little bit about the ever-present challenge in startups, which is fundraising. I imagine that with a second-time founder who had a successful exit, fundraising was a different path than how many people experience it. But I'm curious to understand a bit about how you're funded and whatever detail you're comfortable sharing and sort of the journey that took.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you hit the nail right on the head from the get-go. So it definitely was a very different journey than I know even Dessa was. So right now, I can't give numbers, but we're funded by a group called the General Partnership, and specifically the two of the co-founders of that fund, Finn and Dan Portillo, Finn Barnes and Dan Portillo. They went through the exit with Dessa, and I think there was a bit of a strong trust that was built within that process, specifically between them and Stephen. There's this again, coming back to the dating mentality. It's similar when you're looking for funding, especially if people want to be, seats on the board or, outside seats or whatever that involvement is. It becomes a very kind of intimate piece of the company. And I think it goes both ways because there's this power dynamic a lot of the time where, the startup that just needs money to survive, they're willing to give a lot of concessions. And if they give too many concessions, that if their equity decreases too much, they might not be as motivated. If they feel like they're being watched all the time, it creates this weird work dynamic. So in a perfect world, it does become this, two-way street of trust. And I think that got built fairly well during the DESA acquisition. And so when we started exploring this idea, it was a natural kind of conversation to go back to them and say, this is what we're thinking, and this is how much we need to kind of get it off the ground. They are the type of people who will get in the mud and get dirty with you, but they'll also they trust you, right? So it's we don't necessarily need to talk to them all the time because they know that we're moving in the right direction and we're heads down. They don't need to motivate us with anything else. But when we need help, they're right there. And they've made connections in both video game and the film industry, with other investors, with just interesting people. So it became this really natural, relationship for us to pursue again. We're so lucky to have them on board. They've been amazing.
That's
but
awesome.
It was a lot easier than the first go around.
100%. Were they, out of curiosity, in again, I don't want to overstep boundaries, but was this sort of they had heard that you and Steven were percolating something and sort of almost proactively hey, assuming it's not a terrible idea, we're in, versus did you ever have to do more of the formal let us go on a road show and try to accumulate and pitch to a bunch of investors, even though they're all very friendly and we have high ends, but we still have to do the song and dance? I'm curious what balance there was. Because I've heard for second-time founders, especially ones with exit, it can go both ways. It can be the minute you have golden handcuffs off, if you have any idea whatsoever, we're in, right? And others who are still no, let's still do the performative song and dance.
Yeah, I mean, I hope they don't mind me saying, but it was more of the first. It was, and I had kept in touch with Dan throughout my time after the acquisition. Steve kept in touch with him a whole bunch, so he had known about the idea, and Steve had talked to him pretty in depth about it. So I think the conversation really became, well, the idea seems good. And we think you seem to be the right people to do it. So, if you're ever starting this as a real thing, let us know and we're in.
That's awesome. When you think about the fundraising journey, obviously it's a very, privileged one, but I'm sure it has its own pros and cons, right? When you think about how you thought it might go versus how it went and sort of that relationship so far, what's your biggest sort of surprise, learn, what are the things that you are still working to process and deal with that, even though it was hey, we're in as soon as you're ready, right?
Yeah, I think there's this funny dynamic that I think Steve and I both have, where we always assume the best but expect the worst. So you'll have these conversations with people, and they're yeah, we love it, and we're there, and we're totally going to back you for it. And the money doesn't show up on the first day, and you're it's over. They never sent it. Someone they had some conversation, and they've realized we're idiots, and it's all falling apart. So there's this this kind of gut feeling that I think it works really well to keep us motivated. But it's who knows when it's going to fall apart, and how these conversations are going to fall apart. There's a million different ways that it could go wrong. Mm-hmm. And sometimes even when the money's in the account, you're Are they going to come to us and say they need the money back? Are they going to, how does this all break down? And I think that is probably going to be an ongoing thing that I just need to continuously process and be, get comfortable with at some point. But I think that's really one of the big things is, as you said, it's such a privilege. And I could spend a whole podcast talking about all of the amazing, wild experiences that I've had and how thankful I am to have had them. And there's this weird amount of stress when you're talking about large sums of money that just, I feel like, warp your brain a little bit in how the world works and can be pretty nerve wracking. I know, like fundraising itself is a whole full-time job. like, so I feel like it's just it's a strange, weird, stressful, exciting privilege to be a part of.
Do you have, and this may, depending on your guys' situation, be too far out, but like, do you have any, stress is probably always there, but sort of like any very specific focus stress or like, oh God, I got to learn this thing before we do more fundraising, right? Because like locking in the first round, is always one thing. Doing any subsequent round is always sort of a different ball game, right? With its own set of rules and totally bizarre things that come up. And so, like, as you're looking on the horizon, is there anything you're thinking about, like, I should learn this, or I need to prepare myself in some way for that next round of fundraising?
Yeah, I feel like my big gap right now is product. So I've built a ton of technology, but turning it into something that, especially consumers, like B2C, something that people love and have fun with. I can turn something on and know if I like it, but does it have mass market appeal? I think that's one of the big things that I'm still trying to figure out. And we've put together a really solid group of advisors and teammates who have experience with this and are just brilliant. Marcus Gosling is one of the guys that we've been working closely with, who just like has this really keen sense of what people will find fun, and across generations too. He'll be like, if you make this, then millennials will love it. And so that's been one of the biggest things that I think has kept me up at night. Mm-hmm. There's a ton of things on like the technology side, but I think we have paths forward for those things. Making sure that we can build something fun that people enjoy is, I feel like, the gap at the moment.
So let's talk a little bit about your sort of personal journey on all of this, right? Like we've talked a lot about how that's intersected and been combined with Steven and sort of the journey that the company has gone, but let's really narrow the focus directly onto you, Cole. Spotlight directly on you. What do you feel like has been your biggest struggle as a founder, and how have you been really trying to approach tackling that struggle?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love when the spotlight gets put on me. No, not at all. This is always the hardest part.
Yes, engineers, classically the ones who want to take center stage.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like, a lot of people will probably answer something on the business side or the tech side or anything like that. I feel like my biggest biggest struggle has been like family life balance. Well, work family balance, maybe I'll call it that. I think like the whole work life balance concept, when you're a founder of a company in a very, very fast evolving industry, like AI, video games, the medical field is heating up right now, especially when you're a co-founder. Work-life balance, it kind of gets thrown out the window. So for me, it really becomes work family. I have a young, almost 2-year-old daughter. My wife has another on the way. in a couple days here. So it really has been, how do I make sure that I'm there for the moments that will only happen one time. The first time she walks, her first word, all those moments, I don't want to miss, and I really want to make sure I don't miss. And luckily, Steve has two young children as well, so we've been on the same page as that. And yeah, I think there's this ongoing issue where schedules don't really exist in the startup world. So, if, especially because we're in different time zones. So someone will message me at, 4 o'clock their time, but that's 7 o'clock my time. It's right in the middle of bath time, but, they might need me. So, I feel like that's been the biggest thing, is just trying to make sure that I balance both of those things and getting the work done while also being there. Also a little bit selfish. I'm in the AI space. I've been in the AI space for about 10 years. And watching a small human grow and evolve and learn things and experience new things is very reinvigorating and thought-provoking for someone in the AI world. Especially my heart kind of exists in the research space. I want to, explore more of that. So yeah, she bumps into something and, stares at it for a moment. It's like, okay, well, what's going on there? So yeah, but that work family balance, it's a big struggle.
Yeah, please don't name your second child AGI.
Yeah, no, definitely not. Yeah. And all these tech companies have done a very good job at crossing names off. There's no Claude. There's no,
Yeah. When you think about, this journey of yourself as a founder and all the ways that you as an individual thrive or struggle in that, usually folks start to, if they want to remain sane, at least start to build support structures to help them on that journey, right? To keep them grounded, to mitigate those struggles, to help them get through them or grow and learn. Can you speak a little bit about your primary support structures for yourself specifically as a founder, right? Like in being on this founding journey.
Yeah, again, I feel like I'm going to go to the family side. I mean, Steve has done an amazing job at being a key part of that support structure. And again, I think that's one of the big reasons why I'm so happy to be going through this with him. Again, I mentioned that work family balance, like we can kind of get each other's back, right? So I've gotten messages from him. It's like, kid's sick, can't show up. Perfect. I got you. And I'll go the other way around a lot. But I feel like from the beginning, my family, my parents, siblings, my wife and I have been together for a long time. Yeah, I feel like that's probably for me the most important part of going through this, is like who you have around you. They got to keep you grounded. They also have to, got to pump you up when when it's needed. There's times I'll go to my family and I'll say, I'm going to show you this thing, just tell me how cool it is. And there's other times I'm like, tell me it sucks if it sucks, and tell me why it sucks. And the ability to have people who can do both is incredibly important. But knowing that if I fail and things fall apart, that I have people who can catch me makes it a lot easier than it would be.
When you think about sort of the potential unmet needs on that support journey, right? Like things that you're like, oh, family has been super supportive and really helped me on this, but like it's maybe keeping it at a steady state, not helping me improve, or hey, I still find myself struggling with X or Y, right? What is the biggest gap where, as you look into 2025 and continuing the founding journey, you're like, I need to find a way to mitigate or help support me on this that I'm not getting enough support right
I think if whoever made the simulation could put more time in a day, that would be huge. No, I think for me, a lot of it comes down to team. I'm a young Canadian guy. I spent a lot of time playing hockey, and so a lot of my analogies and team thoughts are all based around hockey lessons that I had growing up. And I think like there's key components to a team, right? So with any sport, there's different positions. There's how those positions interact with each other at different key points in time, right? If you have a penalty, the other team has an advantage over you for a short period of time. Like, how does your team respond to that, and how do the positions handle it? And so the team that we've put together so far is small but very mighty. It's a very, very good team. Some of the milestones we just hit with our release at BAFTA in London was I haven't seen many teams in my career that would have been able to hit those milestones on the timeline given. So it's incredible. But coming back to my original comment of not enough time in the day, there's still so many things that we need to do and think about. Company is a function of so many different pieces. Social media, I suck at,
now.
but I'm posting on LinkedIn because I kind of have to. If we could get a really strong team member who could kind of take that to the next level. There's a bunch of tech stuff that, are pieces that I'm kind of trying to hack away with as I have time. And as we start fitting and growing the team into those functions, I think that's really going to be, it's going to support me a lot more and make me be able to breathe a little bit more.
Yeah. Amazing. Let's shift a little bit to, really in some ways continue to look at the future, but, what do you see on the horizon that, whether it obviously, I will step back because I was about to say for yourself or the company, but you have an impending child. So that's obviously occupying a lot of your thoughts on the personal side. On the company and the founding journey side, what do you see on the horizon that you're thinking a lot about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So realistically, what we've been exploring a lot and thinking very deeply on is again how storytelling is going to change with these new tools that exist and are actively being released. Every time I look at my phone, I see a comment about DeepSeek, and it's just going to keep going like that. There's going to be new, text to 3D models. There's going to be new, text to voice models that happen routinely. Text to video. There's all these different things that are coming out so quickly, and there's a current direction by most companies that are building these things to basically just completely replace the creative process. And that drives me nuts. It makes me so upset. There's one thing that humans are really good at when you look at them in the context of all of the animals on the planet, and it's creativity. And making sure that we kind of keep that and protect that is going to be very important, 100%. But what I'm interested in is what new ways can we create? If I could just, I could sit down and spend hours and hours crafting a 3D model, or I can type in text and get a 3D model. It's the same outcome. It removes the fun for the person, but it's the same outcome. So what are the new outcomes that have never existed before? And that thing we have an initial assumption on, which is what we released in London. But it's not perfect. And I think there's a long way to go in making it more fun and more interesting. And I think for me, it becomes this balance again between creation and experience, right? So there's going to be new ways to create these new experiences, which means there's a new way for people to experience these new experiences. And what do both of those sides look like is really going to be the continued exploration that we're trying to figure out. Such a fun question to me. I spend hours and hours thinking about it. I will talk to anyone about it who has an opinion, because
Yep. Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons Steve and I connected almost a year ago at this point was because we were both thinking about the space. And, I think I align strongly with sort of your viewpoints on the like, why is every AI company trying to replace humans, especially in creative process? Like, why is this the vector? It just makes me roll my eyes as all of this stuff comes out. So like super aligned with you, and like I'm sure we will find time to nerd out about that. Maybe it's a separate podcast, but yeah. This is generally my super unfair question. I think for folks who have been on multiple founding journeys, it's less unfair. But given the experience thus far, and like, you have gone from sort of having a front row seat to now having the full weight of being a founder on your shoulders, right? And all the choices that come with that and all the decisions. But, if we look to the future and who knows what happens with Pickford, like I'm not going to ascribe it to a successful or unsuccessful outcome. In your head, you can sort of do that on your own. But would you found another company?
It's an insane thing to do. I don't think anyone in their right mind would found a company. I think it gets glorified and it gets romanticized quite a lot. And I think there's a specific personality that fits it. But lots of personalities don't. So for me, it really comes down to, I would start another company, as long as it's the right project and the right people. For me, work has always been about having fun. I don't know what the language policy is on your podcast, but I just want to build cool shit. That's really it. That's what drives me. That's what motivates me. And so if someone comes to me and says, "Hey, I'm going to start this company and I'd want to have you on board, and we're going to make an app where you tap the screen and a bird flies," like, that's been done. It doesn't sound fun. But if someone comes to me and says, "We're going to try and figure out how to change storytelling," and it's someone that I trust and I've worked with before, then yeah, it sounds like a blast. I'm going to have a ton of fun doing it. I'm going to have a ton of stress doing it, but I'm going to have a ton of fun doing it. So it's a very long answer to a yes or no question, but I think it really does come down to personality, project, and who you're doing it with.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So the way I like to close out the podcast is what I sort of call an introspection lightning round. And these are actually, to our earlier conversation about the dating analogy, these are sort of like the questions I would overwhelm any potential co-founder with on for our first co-founder date, which is like a bunch of questions that are just meant to sort of like help us learn about each other sort of quickly. And they sort of come from a friend of mine said that the strengths and weaknesses of a company always are actually the strengths and weaknesses of its founders, right? Like that they just end up manifesting. And so that's where a lot of these came from. And we're just going to power through them and go on a speed date here. So the way we start out is, what is your superpower?
Hitting my head against a keyboard until things work. I grind. I am a very stubborn individual, and I'll just make it work.
Outside of that superpower, what are your biggest strengths?
I seem to have built a good intuition system on infrastructure, making sure they're stable, generalizable, what should be avoided. So I think that intuition around systems has been very helpful. Communication is another big one. My parents used to make us give presentations on topics. I have 3 other siblings. Once a week, we would get handed a different topic, and we would have to give a presentation on it at the end of the week. And I think I hated it at the time, but very helpful.
Do you see yourself continuing that tradition?
Yes, I think so. I think my kids will hate me for it, but
Yeah, when your kids reach an age of majority and go back into the Wayback Machine and find this podcast, they'll be like, "Oh, I see it."
yeah.
What are your big weaknesses?
I have very many. So many. I'm a very slow developer. So hitting my head against the keyboard is usually what I need to do. I'm very slow. My memory's bad. I need way too much sleep. Yeah, I mean, I could list more and more and more, but those are the main ones that come to my head right away.
Awesome. What are your stress reactions? And in this, just to be clear, I generally mean more within work stress. And I generally don't mean physical reactions. I do have a friend who gets walking pneumonia whenever he gets past a certain point of stress. So that does actually impact work as well. But in general, I more mean like when you're under stress at work, how does your behavior change?
I aggressively prioritize and let things that don't push the current main goal just fall away. So my communication in Slack will drop a lot. External emails might not exist unless it's specifically the person who is needed to make that goal happen. I basically just become this like hyper focused, like put on the blinders and just like nothing else matters. Yeah.
And then finally, what are your upkeep needs?
So there's kind of 2 big ones that come to mind. My wife it took a long time for her to get this, but if I've just been through a big push, I need a day and a half of sleep. Just like 1 full day and a half. Don't talk to me. Can't do anything. Give me that. And then by the second half of the second day, I'm ready to go again. But I also think like work wise, there's this like, an innate sense of need to be validated in the releases that I'm doing. So while we were golden handcuffed to the previous company, every couple months there was some reorg or change in priority, and I basically went 4 years without like fully releasing something, and I was losing my mind. I need what I'm built to see the light of day. So we've worked in like routine releases and feedback and all that stuff.
Yeah, I vibe with that a lot, and that's like one of the reasons that we internally have a pretty big playtest culture, right? Like not just in general, but like hyper aggressive, get out to even a small group of external playtesters is exactly that, right? Like that need to release it and see response outside of that sort of like internal team bubble, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. We've started putting together our kind of beta testers list, and it's really like, all right, every other week or every week if we can, let's get it in front of people, play with it. I don't care if it's amazing. I just need to know why it's bad, and we can fix those bad things.
Well, that reaches the end of my questions. I wonder if you had sort of any parting thoughts or any shout outs or anything you sort of wanted to sort of freeform say to our listeners before we wrap it up.
Yeah. I think I just mentioned the beta test group. We're expanding that because of exactly what we just talked about. So, if you head to our website, Pickford AI, there's an email list, sign up, and we just had some amazing feedback in London. We did the release at BAFTA. We had a crowd of people in a theater playing, experiencing this thing, which we still don't fully know what it is. But people laughed and people had fun. And so we're going to be doing a lot more play tests of that and kind of getting people to experience it. It's super unique. It's super fun. So please sign up if you can. And it's going to be changing very quickly. So it'll be a lot to experience for sure.
And if any of our listeners, heard some part of your story and really wanted to get in touch with you or ask you a follow-up question, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Yeah, you can shoot me an email, Cole@Pickford.ai, or LinkedIn. Those are kind of the two ones that I troll, follow along on. So yeah,
awesome. As long as you're not hyper focused on a ruthless prioritization journey.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if I don't get back to you soon, I will get back to you. I do promise that. Usually it's with I am very, very sorry.
Yeah. But, get to the. So what I've learned is you'll have a big email backlog. You'll get through the ship. You'll sleep for a day and a half, and then slowly start picking up emails. Perfect.
Exactly. Yeah.
Excellent.
Exactly. I'm actually in the thick of that right now. There's a bunch of emails I'm still catching up on.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad I got you after the day and a half of sleep.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. And I really appreciated the conversation.
Yeah. No, thank you for having me on. It's nice chatting.
Thanks for listening to the entire episode. If you enjoyed it, please share it with your friends or anyone you think could benefit from it, and leave us a positive rating or subscribe. This episode was edited by Christopher Delano, music by Jake Hall, who's available for composer work in games. And if you're interested in learning more about the Game Founders support community, go to gamefounders.org or email me at carl@gamefounders.org. Thanks so much.